This is your early Christmas morning 28storms.com cyclone update. As of the 5 a.m. tropical cyclone advice from the Bureau of Meteorology, the long-awaited tropical cyclone Grant has formed very close to the coast. The most recent forecast track is now taking the center of circulation directly over the Cobourg Peninsula as a Category 2 cyclone, so further strengthening is expected all the way up until landfall, and a secondary landfall is still anticipated just to the east of Point Stewart. All interests across the northern coast near the Northern Territory are advised to closely read the latest tropical cyclone advice for more specific information, and the main point of emphasis is toward the bottom. It reads that residents from west of Goulburn Island to Snake Bay, including Cape Don, are advised to take shelter now. There is little to no question that Cyclone Grant has been intensifying over the past 6 hours. We don't have the luxury of using visible satellite imagery since it's so early in the morning, but the shortwave infrared does seem to indicate that the surface circulation is very close to the Cobourg Peninsula. And as we turn on the enhanced infrared, this is a fairly dramatic change compared to just 12 to 18 hours ago. At that time, convection was developing near the center, but it was quickly getting blown off toward the west due to some easterly wind shear. But we are now seeing more convective flare-ups, and they are beginning to persist, so the system is definitely becoming much better organized. And the water vapor animation, which gives us a good feel for what is happening in the mid to upper levels of the atmosphere, is also showing an improving environment for further development. We see that the outflow continues to be very favorable looking over the western and northern semicircles, and it's also becoming a bit less restricted just toward the southeast of the center of circulation. The storm is also gaining the much more classic type of cyclone appearance on a more regional satellite animation. And once again, here's a look at the water vapor, and you can easily make out the improving structure of the cyclone. The latest radar mosaic of the Northern Territory, courtesy of the weatherchaser.com, confirms the overall position of the surface center located between the Tiwi Islands and Cobourg Peninsula, and we already have light to moderate shower activity beginning to spread over other portions of the coast, including much of the northeast tip of Arnhem Land, where we do expect the weather conditions to continue to deteriorate over the next 48 hours. So all interests in this region should be bracing for the threat of gale force winds and heavy rainfall and isolated flooding in low-lying areas. The primary threats will gradually begin to shift more toward the south, deeper into the interior portion of the Northern Territory, before the cyclone as a whole begins to drift more so across the Gulf of Carpentaria, and then we could be on the lookout for another landfall somewhere along the Cape York Peninsula in the medium range. So we've already looked at the latest satellite imagery. Now let's go ahead and take a step further by looking at some of the mid to upper level analysis products. First, starting with the low-level vorticity. That vorticity max is very close to the coastline, but it is showing signs of becoming more concentrated and strengthening ever so slightly. And the latest wind shear product shows that the upper level ridge that was once not completely vertically stacked over the storm is now located more so over the center of circulation than it has been in the past. The center of the best ridging was once over more of the interior portions of the Northern Territory, but now it's right along the coast, which is the same rough position as the tropical cyclone center itself, and therefore the wind shear values have decreased back below 10 knots, so it is no wonder that the cyclone is intensifying, and it should become at least a Category 2 right before landfall. Luckily, the land interaction will keep the further intensification in check to some extent. The only concern we would have is if the center started to continue drifting more toward the east, which would of course give the system more time over the open waters. This is something that the GFS is somewhat alluding to, but the more accurate ECMWF model is showing more of a drift toward the south directly into land within the next 48 hours. Also, just to reiterate, the sea surface temperatures across this region are more than favorable for tropical cyclone development, and even if the storm does make a direct landfall across the Northern Territory, which is looking very likely this morning, once it moves back into the Gulf of Carpentaria, the sea surface temperatures in that region are equally as favorable, if not more so, with some areas exceeding 30 degrees Celsius, so we will be having to watch this system as it reemerges and then begins to re-intensify. Next up, we are going to take a close look at the latest run from the GFS forecast model, but it should be noted that the latest technical discussion from the Bureau of Meteorology has made it clear that the GFS has initialized the center of the cyclone a hair too far toward the northeast. Therefore, they are placing a little bit more weight on the latest ECMWF forecast. But as we view the latest GFS animation for the next 12 to 24 hours, it becomes clear that the GFS is taking the center inland a little bit more toward the east of the official forecast track and a little bit closer to Gove. So we will have to monitor this possibility, and a more east-southeast track over the next 12 to 24 hours would possibly give the system slightly more time over water to intensify before landfall. But as of right now, the ECMWF solution within the first day or so appears to be a little bit more accurate. But either way, the GFS does have the right general idea as we go into the medium range, with this system working its way more toward the east-southeast into the Gulf, and the model is clearly showing additional development. And as to how much development occurs, well, that just remains to be seen, and this forecast is still 48 to 96 hours away, so we have plenty of time to monitor this second half of the forecast. But this just goes to show that all interested in the Cape York Peninsula should also be keeping a very close watch on this developing cyclone. Now, as we switch over to perhaps the more realistic forecast from the ECMWF model, we see the overall position of the cyclone near the Tiwi Islands and Cobourg Peninsula, and as we advance this into 24 and 48 hours, it appears that the model is taking the system due south, and so this is in fair agreement with the latest forecast track from the Bureau of Meteorology. And then as we go into day 3 and day 4, much like what we saw with the GFS model, a much more easterly track is expected, and the overall motion of the storm is expected to increase just a little bit as the steering currents become a little bit more dominant, with troughiness taking shape over the Queensland coastline. And then as we work our way into day 5 and day 6, the cyclone is making yet another landfall over the Cape York Peninsula. But as we can see, this model is not showing nearly as much redevelopment as we saw with the GFS model, so this is a very uncertain part of the forecast. This is the latest GFS precipitation accumulation forecast for the next 5 days, and this model is showing in upwards of over 300 millimeters of rainfall across the Northern Territory. And due to the likelihood that this track is a little bit more toward the northeast in the next 24 to 48 hours, it is a fair bet that you can adjust these precipitation totals a little bit more toward the southwest to encompass a little bit more of the Northern Territory. So all interests here, especially in low-lying areas, are advised to take the necessary precautions against the risk of flooding. And finally, just for a better explanation as to why the storm is expected to move a little more toward the east in the next 2 to 4 days, as we take a look at the latest low to mid-level steering analysis, we still have the persistent ridge over Western Australia, but the eastern half of this ridge is going to get beaten down by more troughiness that is coming in from the south, and the northwest flow ahead of these troughs is going to allow for our cyclone to get caught up in that flow. And the pattern change is already becoming more visible on the water vapor animation. Here is the mid-level ridge over Western Australia. It's starting to lift a little bit more toward the northwest, and we see much more in the way of troughing beginning to develop to the south of Perth and extending into South Australia, and then the northwest flow is going to set up along the northern tier of the country, which will allow the system to make that east-southeast turn. So thank you for watching this update, and please alert others that may be interested in cyclone information to check out 28storms.com/cyclone, where you will find more video updates like this one, along with a plethora of cyclone information links that will take you to all of the needed information regarding Cyclone Grant. And the information is not just at the top of the page, but as you scroll down, you will find nearly everything that I use to make these videos in all these links that I have put up on the page. And we do have more specific information regarding Cyclone Grant within the middle, including the enhanced infrared satellite imagery, along with the latest track from the Bureau of Meteorology and other additional information. Also, feel free to subscribe to our YouTube channel at 28storms.com/cyclone. That way you will receive instant notification whenever a new video is uploaded. And also feel free to embed our videos anywhere that you deem fit, as long as you give proper credit to 28 Storms. And you can also check out our Twitter account, that is at 28 Cyclones, where we are trying to update our feed as frequently as possible. So that is all for now. Stay tuned for more video updates.